Some folks say the dead don't bother the living unless they've got unfinished business. But the old Kentucky frontier knew a darker truth. Some men were so cruel, so empty, that even death didn't know what to do with them. If you'd been riding the trace roads after sundown in the 1790s and you heard hooves behind you, slow and steady, but never getting closer or farther, you wouldn't turn around. Because if you saw two riders, one big and broad, the other lean and quiet, with eyes flat as river stones, you'd know. Those weren't ghosts. Those were the Harpes, and they didn't come to scare you. They came to finish you. Evening, friends. Welcome back to Kentucky Melody, where we tell the stories that got whispered instead of written down. The kind folks used to share low and careful, with the fire crackling and the door pulled tight. Tonight's tale ain't about haints or shadows in the woods. It's about two real men. Men so vicious that frontier families started wondering if they were dealing with something less than human, or something far worse. Before we go any further, I want to thank the Kentucky Melody members, the folks who help keep these stories alive and unfiltered. Members get early access, ad-free episodes, and exclusive Baby Earl stories that never make it to the public feed. The kind of tales that are just a little too dark for daylight. If you want to sit closer to the fire with us, you'll find the join button right below this video. Now, pull that chair in tight, because once the Harpe brothers ride into Kentucky, there ain't no safe road left. Out on the early Kentucky frontier, before there were paved roads, before welcome signs, before help was a thing you could count on, there rode two men folks feared worse than panthers, worse than wolves, worse than any haint ever whispered about by firelight. They called them Big Harpe and Little Harpe, and some say they weren't just killers. They were the first kind of evil this country ever learned to recognize. Old-timers along the Green River used to warn travelers in a low voice, eyes never lifting from the road. If you see two men riding together, one tall and broad, the other lean and quiet, and both of them got eyes cold and flat like river stones, you best pray they're nothing but shadows. 'Cause shadows will just scare you. The Harpes, they'll finish what they start. They say when the sun slips low and fog starts crawling up out of the hollers, you can still hear hooves on them old trace roads, slow, steady, patient, no horses in sight. Just that heavy feel settling in your chest, that sense that something means watching from the brush, waiting to see if you're worth the trouble. But to understand why folks still whisper their names like a curse, you gotta go back to a time when Kentucky was barely a rumor scratched on a map. When the line between soldier and murderer was thin as a razor strop and just as sharp. The men folks come to know as Micajah Big Harpe and Wiley Little Harpe likely weren't even born carrying that name. Most believe their true name was Harper, Scots blood, come over to the Carolina backcountry long before the Revolution ever set the land on fire. That country was already hard, but the war didn't just harden it, it turned it rabid. While other settlers picked a side, patriot or rebel, the Harpe boys chose something darker. They sided with whoever would let them hurt folks without asking questions. They rode in with Tory raiding bands, what people whispered about as rape gangs, men who used the chaos of war as cover to burn homesteads, steal stock, and do things best not spoken out loud to anybody they took a disliking to. And the Harpes learned real quick a lesson that stuck with them for life. The world didn't care what you did in the dark, so long as nobody important was watching. When the war finally burned itself out and the guns went quiet, most men tried to lay down what they'd become. The Harpes didn't. They didn't learn peace. They learned they liked killing too much to stop. So they slipped west through the mountain gaps, drifting in and out of Chickamauga war parties, riding deeper into the Cumberland frontier, that raw, lawless stretch where Virginia, Tennessee, and a newborn Kentucky were all still trying to decide what kind of place they'd be. Some men came west to farm. Some came to trap. Big Harpe and Little Harpe came west to hunt people. By the late 1790s, the Harpes holed up in a rough-cut cabin near Knoxville, Tennessee, along a stretch of Beaver Creek where the woods pressed in close and neighbors minded their own business. They weren't alone. With them were 3 women, Susan Wood, Betsy Davidson, sometimes called Maria, and Sally Rice, pulled into that life one way or another, kept there by fear, hunger, and men who treated human breath like it was something they owned. Folks nearby started noticing things went missing whenever the Harpes passed through. Hogs, horses, anything that wasn't nailed down or watched close. Then, one morning, a man named Johnson turned up floating wrong in the river. They'd opened him clean down the middle, stuffed his belly with stones so he'd sink quiet and stay gone. That became the Harpe way. Bodies left in creeks and rivers, guts cut loose, rocks packed inside like ballast. A mean little trick meant to hide the dead beneath the water line. Only it didn't work. The rivers kept giving them back. Swollen corpses would rise days later, bobbing up where children fished and women washed clothes. And with every body that surfaced, the stories grew meaner, heavier, passed mouth to ear, never spoke too loud. By then, even the lawmen in Knoxville knew they had something worse than thieves on their hands. They finally said, enough, and they ran the whole brood out of town. The Harpes gathered their women, their children, and what they could steal, and slipped north through the Cumberland Gap, riding the same wilderness road as honest families, traders, and peddlers. Only the Harpes weren't headed west to build nothing. They were headed straight toward Kentucky with dirtier intentions than the road had ever carried before. Once the Harpes crossed into Kentucky, they did what came natural. They took. Somewhere along that wilderness road, they waylaid a peddler named Peyton, killed him for his horse, took his goods, and rode on like nothing more than a stone had been kicked aside. Not long after, 2 travelers out of Maryland vanished on that same road. Days later, folks found them dead, left where the woods could finish what the Harpes started. One night, at a lonely inn, a Virginian named John Langford made the mistake frontier folks paid for all the time. He was friendly. He shared a room, maybe a drink, maybe a bit of firelight and easy talk with 2 strangers whose names were already being whispered across 3 states like a warning folks learned too late. Next morning, Langford walked out of that inn beside him. Same road, same direction, same bad luck. 2 days later, drovers found what was left of him. His body lay hid behind a log, leaves pulled over him like a careless grave cloth, as if the men who killed him couldn't even be bothered to finish the job neat. That murder lit the first real fire under Kentucky. A posse finally caught their trail, and hauled the Harpes into the jail at Danville. For just a blink of time, it looked like justice might have teeth after all. But jails in 1799 weren't much more than thick doors and thin iron. And the Harpes had slipped worse traps than that. One dark night, chains went quiet, doors stood open, and the Harpes melted back into the hills like smoke. When the men who'd helped the law finally made it home, one of them found his young son waiting, mutilated. The boy's body weren't just a murder, it was a message. Don't help the law if you want to sleep sound. That's when folks stopped calling the Harpes plain outlaws. They started wondering if they were dealing with something else entirely. Something that didn't just kill to survive, but killed because it liked the sound of screaming. By April of 1799, the fear had crept clear across Kentucky and finally landed square on the governor's desk. James Garrett, the second governor of the Commonwealth, put his name to a proclamation. $300 for each Harpe head. That was a fortune back then. Enough money to buy land. Enough to change a man's life if he lived long enough to collect it. The proclamation spelled him out plain. Big Harpe, tall, broad, with eyes that looked cruel even when he was smiling. Little Harpe, leaner, quieter, but carrying that same dead stare like nothing inside him ever stirred. Posters went up on tavern walls, ferry crossings, courthouse doors. The Harpes didn't so much as hesitate. They turned west and kept riding, leaving bodies behind them like breadcrumbs meant to be followed. Two men named Edmonton and Stump cut down along their trail. 3 campers near the Saline River in Illinois found slaughtered where they'd laid down for the night. A farmer named Bradbury, a man called Hardin, and a young boy, Coffee, all left twisted and ruined along Tennessee roadsides. They weren't killing for money. If they took a horse or a gun, that was just extra weight in the saddle. What they really fed on was terror. Folks whispered the Harpes would kill a man for snoring too loud, or for looking at him wrong, or just because the day had gone quiet and they wanted to hear somebody beg. And through all of it, the running, the blood, the stolen nights, the 3 women and their children stayed with them, riding through snow and blistering heat, sleeping in laurel thickets and robbed-out cabins, hearing that awful, wet stillness settle in after the Harpes finished with someone. Try to picture it, a crying baby, the only sound that still belonged to something human, cutting through a nightmare of men, horses, and stolen goods. And Big Harpe, a man already known for killing over noise, sitting there in the dark, staring hard, jaw set, listening. Hounded hard by posses, the Harpes finally drifted down toward the Ohio River, to a place folks still speak of careful, Cave in Rock. It was a great yawning limestone cavern on the Illinois side, a black mouth in the bluff that swallowed light and secrets alike. River pirates like Samuel Mason used it for a hideout. Men who robbed flatboats, sometimes killed, sometimes just took what they wanted and let the unlucky keep breathing. But even those men who lived by theft and blood, found the Harpes hard to stomach. While laying low inside that cave, the Harpes started luring travelers up onto the bluffs above the river. They'd strip 'em naked, not for need, not for money, just to hear 'em plead. They laughed, they watched, and then they shoved 'em over the edge, bodies tumbling down stone, bones cracking, flesh hitting rock hard enough you could hear it echo up the cliff face. that's when you know you ain't dealing with regular outlaws anymore. That's something colder, something that kills because it enjoys the look of fear right before gravity takes over. Even Samuel Mason's gang finally had enough. They told the Harpes to leave. And when river pirates, men who made their living on robbing and murder, decide you're too cruel to keep around, you've crossed a line most folks don't even know exists. Driven out of the cave, the Harpes turned back through Tennessee and into southern Kentucky. And the killing never slowed. Bodies kept showing up in rivers, bellies cut open, packed with stones like dead weight meant to keep secrets down. A man named William Ballard was found split open and thrown into the Holston, his insides given back to the water. Another, James Brassel, had his throat laid wide on a lonely rise, a place folks still call Brassel's Knob, as if the land itself refuses to forget what soaked into it. Then they drifted near Logan County, Kentucky. It was August of 1799, and posses were closing in hard. The Harpes were hiding, nerves frayed, sleep thin as spider silk. That's when Big Harpe's own infant daughter began to cry. Not loud, just enough. Enough to carry in the dark, enough to make a hunted man fear discovery. The baby wouldn't hush, and Big Harpe, a man who'd beaten strangers senseless, shot 'em down, hacked 'em apart without so much as blinking, snatched that child up and smashed her head against a tree. No hesitation, no pause. Later, when he was finally dying, Big Harpe said that was the only thing he'd ever done that stirred any real regret inside him. Sit with that a moment. If that was the only act that troubled his soul, just imagine what the rest of his mind must have looked like. A few days later, the Harpes rode up to the cabin of Moses and Mrs. Steele in what's now Webster County, Kentucky. Worn down, mud-smeared, with their women and children trailing behind them like shadows that couldn't escape. On the frontier, strangers were a fact of life. You fed 'em, you warmed 'em, you trusted God to sort the rest out. So Mrs. Steele opened her door. There was already another guest staying the night, a man named Major William Love, resting easy, never knowing what had just been invited inside. Deep in the night, when the fire burned low and the cabin breathed quiet, the Harpes rose. They murdered Major Love where he slept, cut him down in his own bed, no warning, no chance to wake. Then Big Harpe turned toward the cradle. Mrs. Steele's baby boy, 4 months old, lay there fussing, small and helpless in the dark. Maybe the cry stirred something ugly inside him. Maybe it reminded him of the child he'd already killed. Maybe it just annoyed him, whatever the reason. Big Harpe slit the baby's throat. When Mrs. Steele understood what was happening, she screamed, a sound so raw, so full of terror, neighbors said it never truly left their ears. The Harpes chased her down. They killed her too. By the time it was done, that cabin held more blood than those rough-hewn timbers were ever meant to see. Come dawn, the men who'd been riding the Harpes' trail finally had names to go with their fury. Moses Steele, a husband with no wife, a father with no child, left standing in the wreckage of his own home, and neighbors, men sick to death of finding butchered kin along the trace roads. They saddled their horses, they swore vengeance, and they rode. On August 24th, 1799, just a few miles from that blood-soaked cabin, the ride finally ended. The posse caught up at last. Big Harpe and Little Harpe were ahead on the trace, pushing hard, maybe thinking this would be like all the other times, that they'd slip away into the trees and become rumors again. But this time, the woods closed in, and the sound of hooves behind them didn't fade. Shots cracked through the timber. Lead tore into Big Harpe's leg and back. His horse stumbled, screamed, and went down hard. Before Big Harpe could crawl clear, John Liper was on him, dragging him off the ground and into the dirt, a tomahawk rising and falling like it had waited its whole life for that moment. Bleeding out into Kentucky soil, Big Harpe finally started talking. He bragged, he counted, said he'd killed 20 men with his own hands, and that didn't even include the ones he couldn't rightly remember anymore. Then Moses Steele stepped forward. No words, no rush. Just a man looking down at the thing that had butchered his wife and child. And there, with Big Harpe still breathing, still bleeding, still conscious enough to know what was coming, Steele took his head. That head was carried back and set on a pole at a crossroads near the Steele place. A warning hammered into the landscape for any other devils thinking of riding the frontier. Folks started calling that place Harpe's Head, and the land remembered. Even now, in Webster County, the name still lingers. Harpe's Head Road, markers and signs that quietly remind you. Once upon a time, a monster's face rotted there in the open Kentucky sun. Little Harpe slipped away in the chaos. It would take years more. A pirate gang down near Natchez, another severed head, this time Samuel Mason's, before Little Harpe was finally caught, tried, and hanged in the Mississippi Territory. His own head went up beside the Trace Road afterward. A final, grisly mile marker, letting travelers know that even the longest-running evil eventually runs out of road. History'll tell you the story ends right there. Big Harpe's skull bleaching white on a stake in Kentucky. Little Harpe's head staring cold and empty down travelers on the Natchez Trace. But Kentucky folk, we don't hold much stock in clean endings, not when blood's been spilled deep enough. People started saying that spot where Big Harpe's head once hung never felt right again, like the ground itself remembered. Horses would shy and snort for no reason, refusing to cross that place no matter how hard you pulled the reins. Campfires wouldn't catch, or else they'd burn too hot, sparks jumping and cracking like they were mad about something. Every now and then, a traveler would jolt awake from a dead sleep, heart hammering, swearing he'd just seen a tall, broad man standing over him, grinning, hands dark with blood that wouldn't wash off. Up and down them old roads, the stories still get told. A rider on a big black horse at dusk, no face at all, just a black place where a head ought to be. Another rider trailing behind, thinner, quieter, laughing soft, though his mouth never moves. Two sets of hoof prints on lonely stretches of dirt road, pressed deep into the earth, with no horses anywhere to be seen. Some folks swear that if you walk that ground late at night, you can hear a baby cry off in the distance, thin, desperate, cut off too sudden to be natural. Others claim they've seen a woman in old frontier clothes near the tree line, hair loose, eyes wild, reaching toward the road like she's trying to warn folks back, before those two riders come riding up behind them. Truth is, the Harpes did so much evil that it settled into the land itself, soaked in like a stain on old wood. You can sand it down, you can paint over it, but on damp nights, it always bleeds back through. So, why drag up the names of two long-dead killers tonight? Because the Harpe brothers remind us of something we don't much like to admit. Sometimes the worst monsters in a Kentucky story don't have fur, or claws, or eyes that glow red in the dark. Sometimes they wear homespun shirts, ride good horses, smile polite like any other neighbor you might pass on the road, right up until the moment they decide you ain't gonna see another sunrise. They say caving rock still carries screams up from the bluff when the river's low. They say there's a heaviness at Harpe's head, a feeling like eyes on your back even when the road's empty. Maybe that's just superstition. Or maybe the land remembers the first time it ever met a kind of evil so bad, folks didn't even have a word for it yet. They had to make one. They called it Harpe. So let me ask you this. Do you think places can remember what happened on them? Do you believe evil can sink so deep into the ground it never quite leaves? And have you ever driven a stretch of road that just didn't feel right, even in broad daylight? Let us know down in the comments. And if you enjoy these deep dive stories from Kentucky's darker past, consider joining the Kentucky Melody members. Members get early access, ad-free episodes, and exclusive stories, some told by Baby Earl, that never make it out here into the open. Now, next time you're driving a lonely Kentucky back road at night, and your headlights catch a shape just for a blink, two riders in old-time clothes, one big, one slight. Don't stop. Don't wave. Don't roll that window down to be polite. Just keep that wheel straight. Keep your eyes ahead. Because out here in the bluegrass, we've always had ghosts and witches. But the Harpe brothers, they're a reminder that sometimes the scariest things that ever walked these hills were human all along.